Hi, I'm Dave Dinkel, real estate investor since 1975. This is part of a continuing series of what I call Mythbusters. This one's on wholesaling. Is what investors do legal? My disclaimer is very simple. I'm not an attorney, CPA, or realtor, and any information derived from this presentation is not to be construed as legal or accounting advice, but simply for educational purposes. My Federal Trade Commission disclaimer very simply says there's no average that I can calculate in real estate investing. You should assume that anything you see in this is from an exceptional student or investor. So is wholesaling illegal? And the biggest issue that always comes up very simply is you can't sell something you don't own. However, what you can do is you can offer it for sale if you have an equitable interest in real property, is what we're going to be talking about. Real property is commercial property, single-family homes, multifamily property, so on and so forth, but it has to do with real estate, not an automobile, not a mobile home. So what an equitable interest is what makes this process absolutely legal. And what you must have is a signed contract for a purchase and sale agreement, an assignment of contract, or an option agreement. I'll go in deeper into this subject shortly about another state, Illinois, that has done an interpretation of an existing statute. I'll go into that. But you must have a signed contract by a seller to be able to wholesale a property. Now, what does that mean exactly? It means that the seller has in fact authorized you to purchase his property. Now, can you run that on the MLS? Can you just run down and list it on the MLS, put it out there, sell the property? No. If the seller is going to allow you to list it on the MLS, you have to have an MLS listing from a licensed person to do that. Now, some of the investors that I have that do virtual wholesaling include in their contract a very simple clause. It's in fact a small limited power of attorney, or short limited power of attorney, I should say. It simply says that that seller authorizes through the limited power of attorney the particular investor that's buying the property to actually go ahead and advertise it on the MLS. Now, when that investor goes down to his local broker and says, here, I want to run this ad in North Dakota, for example, the broker may say no. But if he shops around a little bit, and he does, he finds an agent or a broker who will put it on the MLS for him, literally post it. I understand the criteria for listing it on the MLS is the listing person has to be the owner of the property on title. But there has to be exceptions because of infirm people or things where power of attorneys are involved, so on and so forth. He does it as a course of business when he's doing virtual wholesaling in other states. But let's talk about the exception here, so to speak. And there's other states working on this now. What about Illinois? Is it illegal in Illinois? Before I get into that, I'm going to answer that in detail and how to work with that situation. I want to show you a deal talk that I did recently. It took 1 week's worth of closings, and I went through them because the people who should be looking at this webinar are licensed agents, and you'll see why in a couple of minutes. But what I asked in this deal talk was to look at 15 closings for that week that I did. These are all ones that I funded, both students and investors, no money transactions. If there was an earnest money deposit the investor had to put down, I'll show it to you, and we'll talk about how to do earnest money deposits or not. So here's what you are going to see. What I did is I cut off the bottom of the A to B and B to C HUDs. It's the only important part on the HUD. Page 2 has commissions and it has expenses. Page 1 has all the players. They're not important in the conversation. What's important is how much money I had to put into the property, which is this number. That's the bottom line, A to B HUD, left side, which is the buyer side. When you go to close the second leg, the B to C leg, I get the funds back as a transactional funder, and the investor has a net profit. This is what the net profit is on the B2C HUD, right side, last line on the page. So I'm going to go through these very quickly, just add these on here because there's 15 of them. There's no reason to go over them individually because I'm going to show you a summary coming up very shortly of exactly what this means. There's example 15. Again, every one of these HUDs was completely available. They're real transactions, which are virtually no money in the deals, as you'll see. So this is a summary of the statistics. First column is the number of the property. I just went through 1 through 15. There they are. The reason I have the SS there, it's a short sale. So out of 15, 3 of these were short sale transactions. Second column is the actual purchase price by the investor student. And you can see it goes from as little as $4,908 to as much as $240,000. What I did next is I took the total and divided that by 15, and the average cost is $71,743. I'm trying to show a movement in the market marketplace towards lower priced properties. And I did this to show a trend in the marketplace. Now, these trends can last 30 days or 3 days, or they could last a year. I don't know. But what I do every once in a while is I like to see what's happening around the country as well as where I am locally. And if you're saying to yourself, well, hey, Dave, I've never seen a $4,908 property in all my life. If you're in Detroit, that's probably an average price of stuff you're going to buy all around you. But that's not where these are. And one of the other key points in what I'm doing here is, even though you may be where the median value of a property in your county or your city is $300,000 or $400,000, these type of properties always do exist. A number of these, I'm not going to tell you how many, it doesn't matter, are actual vacant lots. And I'll show you a very good example of a vacant lot property coming up. Okay, so here's the net profit on each of these deals. And you can see the two that I have in the gold color, so to speak, are short sales. Ironically, when I did these, one of them is $240,000 purchase price. The other was $76,878. There was a $200 earnest money deposit on one of these properties. Otherwise, those profits would have been almost identical, which couldn't have happened if I had tried to do it. These are real properties, real HUD statements, real transactions, and these are the real numbers. Here's the earnest money deposits. Now, this is one of the reasons I put this summary together so you could see it. $50, $100, $100, $1,000, $200, $2,000. I did not put the earnest money deposits from the end buyers on here, and I could have, but it doesn't matter. All that matters is how much is it going to cost me to put it under contract? What's my purchase price? How much of an earnest money deposit do I have? And how can I make the biggest possible wholesale profit in the shortest time? Again, these are same day double closings, virtually no money in the transaction. Well, Dave, there's $50, $100. Oh, there's a $2,000. That's no money. Well, if you come to someone and you say, I have this buyer and I have this seller, and between them I'm going to make a $17,000 profit. Can you help me? I imagine that you can find friends or family members who might put up that $2,000 for you. Can I borrow $2,000? What are you going to pay me? Split the deal with me. You don't split the deal with him. You give him back his $2,000 and double his money if you want to. But get the deal done. The other thing to show you here, in the purchase price, only 3 of them are $100,000 or more. All the other ones are lower priced. Oh, and by the way, 9 out of these 15 have no earnest money deposits whatsoever from the original investor. Now, there's 3 ways to do no earnest money deposit, and you're going to think to yourself that, gee, the contract says you have to have an earnest money deposit, therefore the contract's not legal. Stop, stop, stop. If that was the case, we wouldn't do these. There is 3 ways to actually do the no earnest money deposit, and that's how we're able to do those legally. All were no money transactions. You know, I keep stressing this because one of the big handicaps, the fears that people have before they go into real estate investing, is very simply, I don't have any money. If you've been in the business and you've done closings, a person's buying a $300,000 home, and you're going to get a $9,000 or $18,000 commission. It's pretty exciting. But the paperwork is, the seller doesn't have a lot to sign. But the end buyer who gets financing has to go through all kinds of stuff. Probably has 2 or 3 inches of mortgage documents or deeds of trust to sign and everything else. That's not what we do. What we do is same day double closings. So they're very simple, they're very quick, and they can be very profitable. So if you're used to saying to yourself, I make 3% commission or I make 6% commission, these on average have a 29% profit in them. You could call it a commission, but instead of 2.5, 3, 5, or 6, these people got 29%. Now, I'm not going to go into how many of these were hybrid transactions. I'm going to talk about hybridism, and then we'll go into details on exactly how a hybrid transaction works. But I want to show you something. One of the agents that is well known around town, an investor went to him and said, I'm going to get a property under contract. I'd like you to list it for me or put it on the market. Well, he couldn't put it on the market because the seller didn't sign a listing agreement, but the agent said to him, no way in hell. My time is worth so much more money. You're coming to me for a $25,000 piece of property that's a piece of junk, and go away. Just leave me alone. Well, this is the HUD statement. Top half of the A to B HUD. It's going to be a double closing, A to B, B to C. My commitment to this thing was I fund whatever is needed on the A to B closing, the first leg I call it. So in this case, what I've done on the HUD, because this is how I normally do my HUDs, is I blocked out all the players, so to speak. So they're anonymous. So here it is. Purchase price $25,000. Here's the bottom half of the A to B HUD, first page. No earnest money deposit. Here we go. Dave, you told me, but I just can't believe it. I went to real estate training school and they said you have to have an earnest money deposit. Well, there's another example of no earnest money deposit. But here's the bottom line. This person needed $25,772.01 to close, which I put up 100%. So closing costs, whatever else is involved, I put it up. Now let's go to the B to C HUD. Here he is selling it. Same day, $145,000. You say to yourself, what the heck was that piece of property? It's raw land. How could he sell it for so much more? The key to doing these transactions is a great buyer's list, a very specific one in some cases where, for example, you can go to a developer who has developed parcels elsewhere and say to him, oh, by the way, I got a 10,000 square foot lot and you can put 2 or 3 townhouses on there. And this guy is used to paying $50,000 per townhouse lot and he thought he got a steal at $145,000. So here's the bottom half. Once again, we see no earnest money deposit from the end buyer. That's not good. One of the things that I try and have students do is make sure that whatever your earnest money deposit is, the end buyer's is at least 2 to 5 times more. Reason being, if your end buyer doesn't close, he forfeits his earnest money deposit and you may have to forfeit yours if you can't find a buyer quickly enough. What does that mean? It means when you come out of the closing, having lost your earnest money deposit, you still have money. You've made more money on the closing than if you had closed it in some cases, ironically. But here's the transactional funding being paid back. Remember, this is $25,000 property. This is the net profit. There's no other things going on here. $116,144.25. So my question to listeners who are listing agents is, why can't you find the $25,000 property and find buyers for more? So what about median price properties? And I bring up median price for a reason. Most of the data services use one of two methods to determine market value. Now everybody knows about after repaired value and they know about comparables in an area. With agents you put together a BPO or broker's price opinion, or you put together a CMA, a comparative market analysis. And the idea being when you sit down in front of the seller, you can say, I don't care what that other guy says. I think we can get this much money. Your goal is to get the listing. Once you get the listing, you have two options. You can try and sell it yourself, or you can just put it on the MLS and go to the next one. And I think multi phone calls a day with a robo-dialer and so on, just simply say, put it under contract and run. Let the other people take care of dragging people out to the house and showing it and all that stuff. And that's great. You know, I've talked to guys who do 150 closed contracts a year. 150. I repeat that because that's a lot of closings. But they do that. They do robocall dialing. I don't know the numbers, but I do know that their net outcome out of a 6% commission is 1%. Well, wait a minute, Dave. If they're getting 6% on the listing agreement, how in the world are they netting 1%? Because they don't have buyers. They don't look for buyers. They put them on the MLS and let the other guys come in. And they have overhead, splits and various things like that, staff. They don't do all that stuff that has to be done to the properties. So in retrospect, when I talked to one or two of these guys and I said to them, how much did you make on your 100, 150? I was shocked. I mean, it was like, boy, you're really working really hard for really very little money. And they said, you're right. We want to be investors. That's why they came in the business. If you say to most, why did you get your license? The first comment usually is, I want to help people. I want to help people solve their problems. They don't understand the business. And the second motive, overwhelmingly, is I want to be an investor and get close to the market, which they found out really doesn't work very well. So there's a number of things that come together here. The data conglomerators, so to speak, put together closed comparable sales. They create a market value, and the market value is either based on median prices or average prices, and these are common standard operating procedures for different types of software companies. Which one is better? Typically the median is the better, and you should know which one your data company uses if you're paying for a data service. Now, I don't know if the MLS, this is going to show you how ignorant I am of what the MLS does or doesn't do. I don't know if they give you a market value, but if you flip over to Zillow, they give you a Zillow value and so on. I went through with one property, 6 different online Zillow and Trulia and so on and so forth. Of course, I got 6 different prices, one of which was $100,000 less than the other guys together. And that's one way to figure out what the thing is supposed to be worth on a good day. It's only worth what you can sell it for in the time frame you have to sell it. It can be waterfront property, no fixed bridges, close to the ocean, I mean minutes to the ocean. And if you can't sell it because you don't have buyers, it's not worth anything. anything. And we see that happen every once in a while. So what I'm talking about here is median prices. I want to show you one where the median price was significantly different than the average price. And when it was presented to the seller, he went with this price as his sale price rather than an average price that was distorted on the low side. So this is the A to B HUD. Again, you see I cut this one up differently to kind of show it to you all in one spot. Purchase price $325,000, $5,000 earnest money deposit. Now, some of you will say, I wouldn't take less than $10,000. I wouldn't do this. And, well, good for you. I want to show you what other people do all around you while you're gloating about this is the only way that I would do it. You're just not going to do it. Let somebody else do the business. So here's what was needed. $318,400.50. I funded it. So this person has $5,000 in the deal. Well, where did he get that? Father-in-law. He didn't have the money. I don't loan earnest money deposits. So Dave, what's going on here? Well, I want to show you what this is. And for you guys that are out there that are kind of on the savvy side, been in the business a while or whatever else, you'll see an opportunity here for you to get a new prospecting technique that not very many people are doing. This is the B to C HUD. Again, A to B on the left side is the purchase price from the investor. B to C side on the second side here is the sale price. There's the sale price, $412,500, paid $325,000. No earnest money deposit. Now this is exactly backwards. Where it's no earnest money deposit, it should be $5,000. On the other side, it should be $0, but it's okay because it closed and there's my transactional funding coming back. Boom. So this investor made $90,406.50 in one day, double closing, with no money in the transaction other than borrowed funds. But why did I show you this? Here's the reason. First of all, this is a multifamily property. One of the things I was going to talk about today at the seminar was where's the market headed? In fact, I don't have any good news to tell you. And the individuals, investors who are going to be on the dark side of what's coming is going to be landlords. And we see it. There's a rush to the door to start getting out of rental properties. Anywhere from 2 to 87 units is the most I've seen come on the market. Now, they're not getting it yet. The landlords are holding their prices at rates that are way above real market value. But that's going to change. Now, I'm not going to get into a long story about what I think is coming or not coming. You just have to be prepared for something akin to what we have seen in 2008. That means if you're holding properties, you're going to have to hold them. And if they're income properties, you may have a fight to get rents and pay a mortgage. So be prepared for the worst, and if the best happens, you're good. You're prepared and you're off and running forward. So what I wanted you to see here is this is a multifamily property, but it's a 1031 exchange. If you're not familiar with 1031 exchanges, look them up, get some information on them. Basically what it says is I have a low cost basis in a property. I don't want to pay capital gains, but I don't want the property anymore. So I have the option to sell that property and purchase another property, what used to be called like kind. Now, what's like kind? It used to be multifamily to multifamily, but the rules have been relaxed by the IRS over the years, and in this case, this person was doing a multifamily to a single family home. It was approved, so off and running he goes. Now, he tried to sell this on the MLS, and the agent couldn't sell it. Because there is a time frame when this has to happen, he was a very, very motivated seller. He got the money out of it that he needed, but the reality is he gave up a big chunk of change to the investor involved. So I happen to be in Florida, and I made this presentation to a Florida audience, and I asked this question: will wholesaling be banned in Florida as it has been in Illinois? What Illinois did is they made it illegal for an investor, and I say illegal, it's only an interpretation of existing statute, but to assign a contract, sell a contract, exercise a lease option, or otherwise convey the property without first paying for it. Okay, unless a broker presents the contract to the seller, as I understand it. Now, if I've said something slightly wrong here, don't get your high horse up. I'm trying to give you an overview of what I perceive to be correct based on attorneys I've talked to and so on. And when it first came out, nobody seemed to know exactly what was going to be done. Their contention is the transaction is an A to C. In other words, the original seller is actually closing with the end buyer, and the investor in between, that's you, the investor, is using the end buyer's funds to purchase the property. Is that true? Yeah, frankly, it's pretty true, because you don't have any money in the game. That's what it comes down to. So there's only two ways to overcome this new interpretation of an existing statute. That's to get your broker's license or to do a double closing. When this regulation first came out, I called and I talked to some attorneys that do closings, and they said to me candidly, oh man, it's a bonanza. And I said, what does that mean? They said, well, all these guys running around doing wholesale transactions and signing contracts now have to have a broker present the contract to the seller. And literally what we have is a line of guys who didn't do any business very much anymore on call to go out and present the contract to the seller. Hey, come on. Why don't the investors get the license? Most of them don't want to. They don't have the time, don't want to take the test. They just don't care. However, the other way to do it is to do a double closing. So my double closing fundings in Illinois have gone up substantially because as long as you have a reasonable profit in the property, where you're going to make somewhere $10,000 or more, it behooves you to do a double closing. I'm not saying that because I want you to go and assign your contracts and then I won't get paid. No. What I'm saying to you is the first time you have an assignment of a contract where the end buyer doesn't close because he sees your profit, or the original seller says you cheated me, you're going to realize that a double closing would have been a cheap way to go and save a lot of money on it. So I want to talk about the investors. That's us, so to speak. The good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, we're constant buyers and we change neighborhoods. That's what it comes down to. Bad, we can't pay retail. So if you're an agent looking to get hooked up with investors and you think, man, I can generate these rundown properties and stuff all day long, you're missing the point. If you can find those deals yourself, you should be an investor hat on at that time and make the profit that these investors would have made, or at least half of it. We're going to show you exact examples of that. So they can't pay retail. It's on the MLS. They need viable deals. That's not what most MLS listings offer. I have an axiom that I think is very true, and that is if a property's been listed for 5 days or more in the MLS, it's not a deal. That's it. Why do I say that? There are numerous wholesale or investor operations where they have literally a phone bank of guys. And what those guys do is they have autoresponders to the MLS. Every time a new property comes up on the MLS, pops up on one of their screens, and they can make an offer on it. Well, what happens with an offer? It will be accepted because most oftentimes they offer full market value or slightly less. It goes under contract, and then they can't close on it because they can't find a buyer for it. And then the agent gets bent out of shape, rightfully so. The seller gets bent out of shape because he had an expectation of selling it. Everyone's a loser. But I would say this also, despite that, and saying there's no deals on the MLS, probably 90% or close to that number of our deals come from listings on the MLS, and our average net wholesale profit is anywhere between 5 and 10 times the average wholesaler. How do we do that? Dave, that doesn't make any sense. You're telling me there's no deals. Now you're telling me there are deals. Yes, there are deals, and we use those deals, but we don't get them by simply making offers at list price on the MLS. We can't compete with other investors. We have to use a different strategy altogether, and it works very well for us. But here's the ugly part. Investors have to get a real deal, or they simply wind up canceling their contracts. They have no other option. Agents understand that they have time invested. Sometimes they actually spend some money on advertising, not for that specific property, but typically for themselves. But investors have real hard money in the deal. Whether it's their own money or it's hard money from a lender, they stand to lose a lot more. And ironically, many rehabbers lose money before they wind up going back into wholesaling if they started there. Because there are agents listening, and if you're not an agent, it doesn't matter. This is going to be a key point. I want to look at proof of funds because this is a sore spot for me. How good is a proof of funds? Well, it depends on the agent that's looking at it or the seller. Sometimes the seller, who may be a little bit more savvy, will say to you, I want to see that you're going to close on the property. Show me a proof of funds. So as a transactional funder, I give out a proof of funds, and what happens is it's a real proof of funds. It's a verified bank account, and it's not good enough. Well, let's talk about why wouldn't it be good enough. First of all, I don't put money into or put your name on a proof of funds, and neither does anybody else that has any common sense in this world. I don't put money into your bank account for one day so you can show it with your name on it. Some of these things that people ask me just do not make any sense. But here's what I do. I have an account that I use on many transactions, and what it is, I have to keep a substantial minimum balance in it, and I get some benefits here and there and so on and so forth. But when you pull up my account online to see what the balance is in the account, it doesn't have my name on the account. It only has it on the monthly statement. So I go through and I explain this to the listing agent, and typically he or she doesn't want to hear it. It has to have your name on it. There's no account in the world that doesn't have your name on it. Yes, there is, and I do that. So what do? I can go back to the investor and tell him what some of my very successful investors have done. Years ago, I said to one of my guys who was a 7-figure person, now we're not talking about commissions. When we talk about what investors make, my investors or students talk net numbers. If you say to me, I made $100,000, that doesn't mean you spent $80,000 on advertising and you made $100. It means that after advertising and expenses, you made $100 net. So this person is in the low 7 figures now. We're talking about 1.2 million, so you understand. And I said to him, you haven't asked me for proof of funds in a long time. He said, oh no, I don't ask you because I roll my own. What does roll your own mean? It means that he gets a PDF editor, and that's what he does, and rolls his own. Rolls 2 zeros on whatever the balance is, checks them to make sure they add up, and shows it to the realtors who think that they know pretty much everything going on. So is he defrauding them? Let's talk about it. Well, if he went and applied for a loan and did that, he's looking at hard time. He's not applying for a loan. So is there any consequence here? Unfortunately, there's no consequence. And I say unfortunately because I don't like to deceive people like that. But that's what some agents believe that they're looking at. And in fact, all they're doing is being caught in a trap of this guy is no stronger than that guy. If he can't get a deal, he's going to cancel the contract. So you, somewhere along the line, need to know who you're working with, and you need to become that person you're working with so you can buy and sell your own deals. Now let's talk about, do property owners really need investors? What we do is we solve problems that require convenience, speed, and most importantly, certainty. And why do I say certainty? When you go out to make a presentation to a seller, you sit down, you have a beautiful presentation, I'm sure, and it talks about the firm, and it talks about you, and it talks about the BPOs. And ultimately, if the client is under a time constraint, he should say to you, by the way, next Thursday I'm going to lose my house to a tax deed sale. Can we get it done by next Thursday? I hope that your response is no. The average time on the market these days is, whatever. Because too many times I see an agent say yes, take the listing, put it on the MLS, and it doesn't sell. And what happens? The guy loses his house. Is that a common occurrence? I don't have any idea. Times I've seen it, it's too common. The point here is, are you doing what's in the client's best interest? The only question you should ever come away knowing from a sales situation, because that's what you're in, is to ask the question, oh, by the way, why are you selling? That goes to motivation. It's the only time they tell you the truth. Sellers are liars, buyers are liars. If they want empathy for their problem, they'll tell you the truth. If you do your homework as investors do before you go to them, you'll know their problem ahead of time. You'll know the sale date on the pre-foreclosure. You'll know the sale date on the tax deed sales. You'll know they've filed bankruptcy or they're filing divorce. All those things will be known to you. So when you ask that question and they tell you the truth, presumably, you can say to them, we can list it on the MLS. Average list time at the price you're thinking about getting for it might be 60 to 90 days. And it could be a lot longer or it could be a lot less, but not with a certainty that you can say, if you go with us, I can close 2 Thursdays from now, or 3 days after the title work is done, or 3 days after the probate is completed and approved by the court. That's certainty. Now, what about convenience? There is a whole undertone in the marketplace for the last couple of years of what are called iBuyers. Those are offshoots of the major brokerage firms who have come to the conclusion that investing isn't so bad. And they've started their own investor units. And when they first came out, they called themselves online, by definition, we are investors. But that didn't go over real well with the agents in most cases that were at these major 5 firms, and they sort of changed the balance. And some of them virtually have gone out of business because they don't know how to do it correctly. But they're out there. And when you're struggling to get a 6% commission on a deal from the seller to approve that, they go right in with a 10% to 15% acquisition fee. You pay commissions. And oh, by the way, the big unknown blob that comes out of your sale price is rehab credit. Now, I was involved in one, and there was a $53,000 net profit from the investor selling to the iBuyer, and because of the repair amount, which they never sent somebody out to check it, so the investor tells me, acquisition fee, the commissions, he made $1,200 out of $53,000 spread. He would have been better off to find another buyer, but it seems like there's a trend where if it's easy, do it. Well, $1,250 or $95 that he made was pretty pathetic. And he knew it. He knew it ahead of time. His concern was, I may not be able to sell it. That brings me back to the most important thing that you can learn from this particular Mythbuster. The larger your buyer's list, the more money you're going to make. You will come to a point in time with your buyer's list where you will be doing other people's deals. You're not going to have to look at properties, no earnest money deposit, and you're off and running, and people will come to you to use your buyer's list. You don't rent it. You don't sell it to people. You use it, and you make the spread in between. For example, seller comes to you and he says, I want $100,000. Okay, maybe he has it at 70, maybe he has it at 90. It doesn't matter. You put it out to your list at 125. Guy comes along, I won't pay 125. I'll give you 122.5. Oh my gosh, I don't have a very big spread in this. Help me out by paying my closing costs. Okay, I'll do it. So what are you going to walk away with? You're going to walk away with a $22,500 net profit, mostly because you got end buyer paying your commission, your closing costs going out. You pay small closing costs on the purchase, and boom, by the way, it may have been a listing that you got, so you might make a commission besides. And maybe I'll show you two commissions: buyer's agent on the end, seller's agent on the front end. Here's what's important. The convenience factor comes down to the amount of money that the sellers are going to receive is not of great importance. Now, for most people in the world, they think to themselves, if I can make an extra $10 or I can save $100 or something like that, it's very, very important to them. But there's another level of people who the headache of an empty house, of vandalism, whatever goes with that property, they just don't care anymore. Maybe they're not wealthy. It doesn't mean they have to be wealthy. They just no longer care about the property. So that's where sellers can use investors for the convenience of selling it. And I say investors tongue-in-cheek with that's what the iBuyers go for. Convenience. That's, if you watch their ads on TV, that's exactly what they're talking about. So the examples would be probates. Why probates? If the probate is in the court and it has an attorney attached to it, very typically one of a couple things will happen. The attorney is a licensed agent, so he puts it on the MLS and he gets the commission. Half of it, whatever, it doesn't matter. His girlfriend, his wife, his best buddy, or somebody at the firm is licensed, so he makes money on listing it on the MLS and so on. But what about pre-probates? That's where they haven't gone into the probate system. That's where they're not listed on the MLS. And that is a huge market. And that's where you as a listing agent can go after those. Those guys that did 100 and 150 closed transactions, they only had two sources for their leads. Two sources. How hard is this? Probates, expired listings. So if you say to me, man, those expired listings are tough, yeah, so are probates. So is any place where you're going to make money that other people know about it, they're going to do the same thing. You have to be better. How do you get better? You practice a lot. You fail forward incessantly, and it will come to you. The harder you work, the luckier you get. Believe me. So tax deeds, pre-sales, on foreclosures, unwanted property in rundown condition, properties with involuntary liens, which are judgments, code violations, and so on and so forth. All of these are high-level prospects for getting listings as well as for investors to do wholesale transactions. So I want to show you something. These are some little-known aspects of contracting, and I'm only telling you about these as part of a bigger picture of why contracting is so very, very important. And a lot of people say to me, I'm afraid of the legal aspects of it. Well, just read it and get over it, because those legal aspects in your contracting are your Thor's hammer to beat off attackers that will say something stupid to you, like, I'm going to cancel the contract. It's not going to happen. Well, you wholesaled it, and I'm going to cancel the contract. Not going to happen. Okay, so assignments of contracts can be done by not checking an option. Typically, the contract has three options. You can assign the contract, you may not assign the contract, and you can assign the contract with liability. Those are typically three options. Now, some states write in you may not assign the contract right off the bat. Why? Because those contracts were made by the Board of Realtors and the Bar Association for that state. They don't want to assign contracts. But if I were an agent and an investor came to me and he said, I want to assign the contract, it checks that box, I would say to him, I'll allow you to assign it, but I want to do it with liability. Or I'd say, okay. The concept or the notion with agents and brokers is if the person's going to assign the contract, he has no money, therefore he's not going to close, therefore I'm wasting my time, I'm exposing myself to losing the listing, and the seller's going to be really mad at me. Well, here's what you don't see. That is, if he doesn't have to worry about trying to close and reclose, he can assign the contract, he can take a small profit on it and still make money. So instead of making $20,000 or $30,000, which would embarrass you if the seller saw that amount at the closing table and the buyer saw the amount he was making, he only makes $2,500 or $3,000. In that case, you're probably making more commission than he is. So I'm not telling you to change your strategy. If you don't want to do it, you're more than welcome to keep doing what you're doing. But what you're doing is cutting off part of the market that would be viable for you. If those investors coming to you are not going to close, and you put on there may not assign, they're not going to close. It doesn't matter to them. If you put you can assign it, they have a chance to assign it and still make something on it, you have a chance that it's going to close. So you can always check out their proof of funds and see how that looks. Now here's something that's going to be eye-opening, and some of you guys are going to debate this, and I don't care. But years ago I found out that if those three options, assign with liability, are no assignment, None of those boxes are checked. The contract does not say that the contract cannot be assigned. The contract is assignable. That means no check boxes, and it doesn't say it's not assignable. It's assignable automatically. Now, having said that and having published that, of course, I got feedback from attorneys. Some saying, you're absolutely right, it's perfect, you're an oracle. Other ones saying, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen because, if it doesn't say it's not assignable, then it's not assignable. All kinds of crazy stuff. One of the guys is a really attorney I admire, and he said to me, I don't agree with it. I don't disagree with it, but I don't agree with it. A year later, he came back to me and he said, you're absolutely right. And I've used that on other contracts because it doesn't have to be on real property. And I think the culmination of that whole thing was the Attorney General for the state of Ohio was being interviewed. I'm not sure how that person got to her, but he was kind of a lead person for an investor group. And he said to her, I have these questions. Will you just answer these for the investors? And she said, oh, absolutely. A number of those things were statements I've made just like that. If it doesn't say it's not assignable, it is assignable. And that was one of the questions, absolutely verbatim. And she said, that's true. That's absolutely correct. So I don't know if an Attorney General for the state of Ohio matters to some of you guys, or if you're an attorney listening to it, you care. It doesn't matter. But it does if it's on your contracting or not on your contracting. Now, I want to talk about notice of interest. 25 years ago, I decided to start filing what I call a notice of interest that basically said, I have a contract on it, so don't close this property with anyone else before my giving a release of lien, because that's what it is on the property, so on and so forth. And the idea was to keep other investors from going directly to the seller, offering them more money and stealing my deal, which unfortunately is a common occurrence, not just in wherever you are, but all around the country. What happened is, unfortunately, an investor and his wife came to a seminar of mine, heard me talk about it. They went back to their city, and in the next 2 or 3 months, they filed 125 notices of interest against every wholesaler in the county that was doing deals. They had no intention ever of closing. What they intended to do is when the closing agent came back and said, Mr. Dinkel, you have to release this notice of interest. It's a lien. Just give me a satisfaction or release a lien. They would say, not a problem. I have a doc prep fee. It's $5,000. And they personally told me that they had made anywhere from $2,500 to $7,500 on every one of those. Well, the Attorney General in our state didn't like that, and somewhere along the line a statute was passed or amended or whatever, basically said you don't have to accept notice of interest to the clerk of the court in the various counties. However, that doesn't end that, and you can put it in your contract that it's acceptable. Even the FAR contract says you can't put a notice of interest in the public record regarding this contract, but you can if you add it as a clause, and you can anyway to gum up the transaction. But if you're going to do that, and I've heard other guys talking about filing notices of interest, we don't call them that anymore, because when the clerk of the court files these electronic filings and everything, they don't look at everything. They just put it in the public record. That's why fraudulent quitclaim deeds are so easy to do and very hard to get undone, unfortunately. So what we've done is graduated into calling them other things, but the right way to do it, besides, I'm going to call it the notice of interest, is to also have the signed contract attached as well as a notice of service to the person that's the seller. Armed with that in the public record, you should not have an attorney write over it when he does the title work. He should come to you and say, we have a problem here, and he does have a problem. Some of them will write over it, and you can go back and make a claim later. I'm not going to get into all these details, but the more you understand the contracting and the language, the more powerful you can become on deals that you never thought you would have been able to do before. So buyers tend to use land trust, and I don't think that agents understand this, but you can change the purchaser, the owner of that land trust, before, the day before, at the closing table, or the day after the closing table. So the person you may be dealing with may not be the owner of the property at all. He's the trustee of the trust. Your assumption is he's the beneficiary. He may not be. This is something we see fairly often, and we go after, typically it's a broker that does this, but it can be a listing agent that's had experience and they think they can intimidate the investor, and oftentimes they do. But I've had it happen to me, where I was doing an REO purchase, and somewhere the asset manager found out I had wholesaled the property already. I had it under contract with another investor for more money, and through the listing agent he came back and said, I'm canceling the contract because Mr. Dinkel sold it to someone else. He can't do that. Well, I can do that. The contract doesn't say that I can't do that, so I can do that. In a short sale, that's not the case. In a short sale, you get an approval letter that basically says this is an arm's length transaction. Realtors doesn't know the seller, or they're not involved with money and hands, and that's correct. And it also says you can cancel right up through the day of closing. Not so with an REO contract. So what did I do? I immediately filed a lis penens, a foreclosure, without a note and a mortgage. And you're going to say, now, Dave, you're really going over the edge. You can't file a lis penens unless you have a note and mortgage. It's called an equitable mortgage, and you can. And in this particular case, I will not mention the bank because I don't want to embarrass them too much. They came back to the closing in 48 hours, and they were really happy to have me close because they understand the cost of defending a foreclosure action because they have to pay for the foreclosure action on the other side to get the property back. So that's an advanced technique. You have to find an attorney that understands the process to do that. Otherwise, every attorney you talk to will say you can't do that. You don't have a note and a mortgage, you can't do it. What I'm going to talk about next is very simply the four most common methods where realtors typically make 9 to 25% commissions and fees. These are very straightforward. These are not hocus pocus. There's actually about 10 of them, but we only have time for the 4 today. Method number 1, you call your commission something else. What do you mean you call it something else? Well, instead of putting down 5 or 6% commission, you add additional fees to the HUD statement. What do they call them? Management fee, service fee, referral fee, bonus commission, processing fee, and lo and behold, an acquisition fee, which is the iBuyer's method of draining 10% or so out of a purchase. Can you do that? Well, in the book that I wrote on doing these methods, I gave an exact HUD statement where I should forget the number now, but it ultimately became a 26% commission on an REO property for the listing agent. So method number 2, buyer and seller both pay commissions. Well, gee, that's easy. Well, it's easy if you do it right and you do it ahead of time. The listing agent gets 6%. So he gets the listing, and the nirvana for every listing agent or broker is simply to have a buyer in his pocket. And sometimes when you do your presentation to the seller, you say to him, I have pocket buyers. That means we don't have to list it on the MLS. Cash buyers will come in. We can close very quickly, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And the seller says, great, I don't care where they come from, but, I'll pay 6%. Because a lot of times sellers don't want to pay 6%. I mentioned before probates. If you look at the number of listed probates versus the number of probates that are pre-probates and not listed, you're going to see that it's like 1 or 2% listed. Why? Beneficiaries don't want to pay a commission. They think it's too much money. They think you're doing things you're not working for. It's like, I don't want that money taken out of my pocket. So what do? As investors, we come along and say, we understand, but I want you to understand this. An agent makes a commission. We're the buyers. All we're doing is bypassing the agent and coming directly to you. We can close in 3 days after approval, so on and so forth. We're cash buyers, don't have to get a loan. What do you think? And what do? They say, oh, not a problem. I'll take that price. What's that price? 30% below what you may have been able to get it listed for, waiting 90 days or more or longer, or maybe not. But they want out. They want their cash. In this case, let's say the listing agent gets the contract listing agreement for 6%. Buyer's agent on the other side, what you do is as the buyers come in, you say to them, or you call them up more favorably because you have a buyer's list of wholesalers, and you call them and say, look, I have this great property. It's only 8 miles from the beach, so if you have a lot of time in your hands, you can walk to the beach. You can put a plastic swimming pool in the backyard. All these amenities that they don't care about. All they care about is what's the net cost to me after closing cost. How much are the rehab costs? And, oh boy, what is the after repaired value? How much money can I make? What they don't see is their cost of money eats them alive. They don't get the project done timely. And by the way, that after repaired value was apples to oranges, so it didn't happen. But you can get 3%. You can say to them, look, I'm going to put you on my preferred buyers list, but I want you to know ahead of time, I'm going to represent you as a buyer's agent. So I get 3%. So what does that mean? It means you're making 9% on the deal where you otherwise would have made 6. Not bad. But it's all dependent on your buyer's list. I say to agents all the time, look, do you ever hear from investors? The answer is they call me every day. They have the same pitch. Hi, I'm an investor. I'm a cash buyer. I can close quickly, blah, 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 blah. And they're calling on a property that's been rehabbed that they couldn't afford no matter what they did. And there's no chance they can wholesale it. That's okay. At least they called. Your job is to say to them, every once in a while I have a decent property that really can't be listed on the MLS because of its condition. And I put it out for my sellers directly to wholesalers like yourself or investors. Are you really a cash buyer? Of course, they're all going to lie and say yes, but you're going to say, good, let me add you to my buyer's list. Add them to your buyer's list. And boom, email them when you get one of these properties under contract. And I say under contract, it can be both a listing agreement and a purchase agreement. So here's method number 3. Find a wholesaler's property and mark it up. What does that mean? All these people are on the list. Some of them actually are wholesalers that have other properties. All you do is go on and Google buy my house, wholesale properties in Denver, wherever it is. These guys are going to come up and you're going to see they have lists. They're doing deals all around you. And you can take those properties, look at them, offer them to your list, and sell them without ever having to have properties of your own where you're going out and looking for them. How well does that work? Depends on your buyer's list and how hard you work it. It's something that can be done by an assistant. You don't have to do it yourself. Method number 4, you partner with investor buyers all the way through the rehab. Now, this was a very common occurrence with some of the agents I used to work with. They would go out and raise money. They would say to very specifically dentists and also some doctors and so on and so forth, professionals, I'm licensed, I can do this, here's what I've done. I will pick the property for you to buy. I will work it all the way through the rehab for you. You don't have to do anything. Just put the money in, I'll sell it for you once the rehab is done. You get the check back and we go on to the next one. And these agents made a huge business of doing that. But here's what they did. Not only did they get a commission going in and going out, they got a management fee for the rehab. Management fee? Of course. The dentist isn't going to take off for an hour and run down and say, oh, we need a new roof. He's going to be doing his dental work, and you're going to be the manager of the property. How much did they get as a management fee? Typically 5% of whatever the original purchase price or the end buyer's sale price was. Partnership profit split. Now, these are all real. And I go into details with HUDs about, how much money could they have made. I'm going to show you in a minute, typical spread. But what was the profit on the deal? It depends on how good the agent was in buying it. If they bought it for 100, they put in 50, and they sold it for 250, the profit on the deal is roughly $100,000. And they would make half of that. Oh man, that's not really fair. Well, if you believe that's not fair, the dentist thought it was the best thing in the world, because otherwise he would have had the money in the bank at 2% or 5% or whatever the rates were at the time. Average net profit from all these sources that I saw. In other words, the management fee, partnership profit split, commissions going in and out, 6 and 9%, were typically 20 to 25% of the original purchase price. There you go. So if you're happy with making 3 to 6%, be happy. Do not look at what other people are doing all around you that are making a lot more money that you could be making. So let me give you something that I call the secret sauce. Okay, sounds silly. This is something that I have very sophisticated investors and students doing from time to time. You buy and sell it at the same price. In other words, property is $340,000. You buy it for $340,000 from the seller, and you sell it for $340,000 to an end buyer. And your immediate response is, that's impossible. Well, think again, because what you have to do is understand the process of who pays what and where the end buyer comes from. So let's talk about where the deals are coming from. These do not change a lot. These are pretty straightforward, but they do shift in time. And the reason I mention the shifting is because you're going to be faced with a lot of, first one on here, short sales coming to the marketplace. Now, one of the places where short sales are most profitable is in multifamily properties. Why? Because banks don't like the liability of tenants and toilets. It's just an open-ended nightmare they can jump into and not surface without, costing them a lot of money. The other thing is REOs. Now, I think it's probably 8 years or 7 years ago, the banks just went to a point where they said, we're tired of dealing with listing agents and brokers. We pay them 3% or 6% or whatever else, and frankly, they don't do very much. They run around, do this and that, but, we're a big bank and we need all that money. We don't want to give that away to agents. How can we get rid of them? But they can't. At least they didn't think they could to begin with. But it's happening. What they did is they created something very simple. It's called an auction site. And more what the REO banks and so on have gone to is, don't worry about the short sales, just send it to the auction. And what they do there is it's a magnet for investors that don't know what they're doing, that overpay for it. And they have a process. If it doesn't sell at the auction, they take it off. They relist it at a much higher price than they could not sell it at before. Yes, they listed at a higher price than they couldn't sell it at before. And they start over again. On an ongoing basis, they reduce the price every 7 days, 10 days. It depends on where they are in the country. Lo and behold, somewhere along there, an investor is going to come in and suck it up and try and rehab it. And if he's lucky to break even, God bless him. But most likely, he's going to be out of the business. So one of the big changes in the marketplace has been raw land. For years, it's sat. And again, typically at the end of a market cycle, I've been in the business 45 years. I've been through 4 serious down markets in the real estate market. What happens to agents in these down markets, and I'm not being facetious, I'm saying this because this is what I've seen. The first and easiest thing for them to do is become bartenders, because I mean there's only so many drinks you can mix up and stuff like that. You have to have a job, and you have it pretty quickly. That's where I see them gravitate to. Again, I'm not being facetious. I'm just saying to you that's the history that I've seen that happens to a lot of agents, because when the listings dry up, competition is extraordinarily high. It becomes harder to make a living. At that same time, raw land starts to come out of the woodwork, because it's the last viable thing that most investors seem that they can get their hands on. Probates are always there. You always have disgruntled beneficiaries who want cash out ASAP. In terms of disgruntled beneficiaries, you very oftentimes, when you have 2 or more beneficiaries, one of those guys doesn't want to sell. And what you have to do is learn how to partition an estate. So you can buy 1% of an estate, or you can buy 0.75% and force a sale and not have to worry about that other guy holding out for more money. It's called partitioning of an estate. Tax deed pre-sales. There's a lot of courses on the market that talk about how great tax deed sales are, and buying tax certificates and so on and so forth. That's not where the money is. You may be able to get a good deal on a tax deed sale, but the reality is you may be getting something that you don't really want. I would suggest if you're going to buy properties that you should use a land trust, because in many counties, in many states, if those properties you're buying have things that were not knocked off by the tax deed sale, not everything is, or certainly the foreclosure, you're going to attach those ugly items to yourself. And if you go to sell your own home and your property is in your name also, you can't sell it until you pay it. So in the future, if people mention land trust, pretty good idea. Expired listings, look, it comes down to you guys couldn't sell it to begin with. And of course what you do is blame each other. I have a better modus operandi than this guy. I advertise more. I have this, I have that. It doesn't matter. It's just a source of leads. How good are they? It depends on how motivated the seller is. We've seen days on market, DOMs, 2,000 days. 2,000 days. Why would the listing agent bother to leave it on there all that time? I don't know. We know that if it doesn't sell in 5 days, then something's going on with it. We don't look at properties that have been on the market for less than 31 days. Why? Because typically they've been through one bad cycle, meaning an investor put it under contract, he couldn't close on it, and now you move more and more towards motivated sellers. That's what we do. We solve the problem of the motivated seller if they're motivated. If they're not motivated, it just goes on and on. Well, things that I'm seeing or not seeing, frankly, are creative financing deals. There's 18 ways to buy properties with virtually no money. And I say virtually no money because, yes, on a lease option, here's a prime example on a lease option. And I have this in my online video somewhere. So an investor comes to me and he says, do you fund $7.5 million? I said, I can, but I have to close through my closing agent and these things. He said, I got all that. I have a property for $7.5 million. I have an end buyer for it also. I said, okay. Thinking $7.5 million, $8 million, something like that. Not so. So he said to me, the original seller won't sign my contract, but I have the end buyer in place. I said, okay. Why won't he sign? He wants a huge earnest money deposit. I said, okay. I think it was $7.3 million. So I said to him, look, tell him you'll offer him $7.5 million as an option contract. He said, what does that mean? I said, tell him instead of his 7.3, you'll actually pay him more than he wants, but when you exercise the option. And he said, okay, how much should I offer him? Is there something I have to pay? And I said, yes, it's called a non-refundable option consideration. He said, well, what is that? I said, well, tell him, here's the option contract. If I can't sell it, it expires. And because it's above what price you want, I'll give you $100 for the option. See what he says. So the investor came back to me and he said no. I said, what does no mean? He said, well, he wouldn't do it for $100, he'd do it for $300. I said, okay. So he wouldn't do it for $100, but he's going to do it for $300. I said, go and pay him the $300. And of course the investor says, I don't have the money. I said, okay, you have the money, but you don't want to put the money in. So go and borrow it from friends or family members. He said, okay. So what happened is, listen to this now. He sold that property for $15 million. I closed it, same day double closing, and he walked away with 6 point something, I guess 7. Now that's a life changer for anybody. It's like winning the lotto. How often do those happen? virtually never. But if you don't know how to do creative financing deals, you'll never see them. The average thought process is, well, I could never own properties myself because I don't have any money. I have bad credit. I can't borrow money. Hard money is too expensive. Not with creative financing, where you have seller options here. Subject to the existing mortgage, you make the payments, but you don't take the liability. You do a seller second or a seller first. One of the questions we always ask is, on a free and clear property, Mr. Smith, you're going to walk away with $200,000, but what were you going to do with that $200,000? And the immediate answer is, I'm putting it in a CD. Okay, what if I could offer you the same protection that the bank offers you by investing it in a mortgage on your own property that I can pay you back after I rehab the property? Now, obviously, safety is an issue. So when you say, well, the bank's insured, the FDIC hasn't had any money for 20 years. It only runs at a negative. There is no money. If there's a bank crisis, don't expect to run down and get the money from the teller. They only have $30,000 max each when they open each day, and the bank only has so much in its branch. There's no money. When a bank fails, the FDIC comes along and says, this other bank close to it, you're going to take over the assets of this bank and move forward. That's how it works. Oh yes, do some people run in and get their money? Yes, but it's very few and far between because there's only so much money. So creative financing deals offer an enormous opportunity for people to in fact keep deals that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to afford. The other bigger issue for me is that hard money lenders aren't closing timely or at all. Well, why does that matter? If you have a listing on a property and an investor or rehabber comes in and says, I'm a cash buyer, he always says that. What does that mean? He said, well, by the time we get to closing, you'll get cash, your seller will get cash, everybody will be happy. And again, what you do is, being the sophisticated person you are, you say to me, well, that's great, show me your proof of funds. And he says, not a problem. So he rolls his own proof of funds, you believe he does it, you get close to the closing, the day of, and you find out that, oh my God, it's not a cash closing, there's a hard money lender involved. And you say, well, you breached the contract. Well, let's not get into, even though he breached the contract, he still has the contract, and you can't cancel the contract without getting a release from him. If you know what I'm talking about, it's a very dark area of legalities that you don't want to start sinking into. And the reason I'm telling you this is very simply that this is important. One of the largest hard money lenders in the country, in March of this year, when the COVID thing really started up, they quit lending hard money altogether. If you were in the last decline we had, hard money lenders lost billions and billions of dollars because they loaned based on after repaired value. Now they loan on not after repaired value, but the lower of market value or the purchase price. So if your market value is 200 and you're buying it for 60,000, they're going to loan on 60,000, and by the way, they pull your credit. So a lot of things have changed. But you need to know this if you're going to borrow hard money, or you're going to have listings that are going to close and a hard money lender's on the end. So what is hybridism and why the big shift to it? Very simply, agents and brokers have realized for I don't know how many years that there's another side to the marketplace. They may not like investors, we're scum suckers, bottom feeders, I don't know, I hear all kinds of names all the time. But the reality is there's a viable place in the market for us. We serve people by giving them solutions that you don't do by listing it on the MLS. And what has happened, the big shift is agents and brokers have become investors, very simply. I call it a hybridism. It's a taking of the best parts of both being a professional listing agent or broker with the best parts of being an investor. So literally, you're going to make more money, and you can make a lot more money by having the power of that licensing. The question is it legal? I touched on it before. In our area, in the Tri-County area that I was born in and work, I would say that by now that I know of, there's 7 brokerage firms that have probably combined hundreds of agents that are not brokerage firms in the sense that they're licensed to do listings or do commissions on the MLS, whatever, however you want to say it. They're investors, and that's what they do. They bring in new agents and they say to them, here's the deal, here's the leads, take those 5 leads, do what I tell you to do, come back, we get a deal, here's how I'm going to pay you. It's not going to be a commission, it's going to be part of the profit spread, so on and so forth. And they haven't just started doing that, they've been doing it for years. What they wind up realizing is they don't want to do listed business at all. Why bother with putting something on the MLS where they're going to make tips versus substantial profits in the same transaction? So if you went to them, banged on the door and said, hey, I want to list a property, they'd say, yeah, go down the street to the other guys. First they'd say, let us look at it. And oh, by the way, we can offer you this in cash. Now, if that's hard for you to fathom, I have to say to you that what I have seen driving around is brokerage firms with national banners. They're franchises of national brokerage firms, the top 4 or 5. On that building where it says that national brokerage firm's name, on the marquee, it says, we buy houses for cash, close very quickly, and whatever else they can put in there that says, if you have a problem, come and see us. We can close quickly. Now they're advertising it. So if you can't wrap your mind around the fact that this is available to you and happening all around you, I put together this specific course exactly for realtors. Now, is it good for people that aren't licensed? Yeah, it's fine, especially if you're going to be licensed, because I have in there how you can start doing exactly the same thing the big guys do by having, I don't want to say minions, bird dogs, these people running around bringing deals to you. But before you can do that, you have to understand how to do it yourself and make some money. Make money before you start spending a lot of money. Let's look at a final example, that 1031 exchange that was involved and why the listing didn't get sold. I mentioned it to you before. The listing didn't get sold because it was listed on the MLS for too high a price. It was the seller's fault. He said, I need this much money, I want that much money, whatever that much money. The reality was, it wasn't in real world going to happen in the time he needed it. So what did he do? He gave up part of his expectation of rolling forward his long-term capital gain to an investor that offered him a solution. Otherwise, he would have paid a capital gain on that money in addition to the other part, put him in a max tax bracket. So here's a pure hybrid transaction, so you see it. Once again, here's the A to B, top half of the HUD, purchase price $274,000. I'm assuming this is going to be a no-money transaction. Let's see. No earnest money deposit. $284,375.06 needed to close the A to B leg of the transaction by the realtor. This is a realtor deal listed on the MLS, second page of the HUD. There's a commission. Hey, that's not bad. That's full 6%, $16,440. Great. So what happened? Here's the B to C HUD now. This property is being resold. Being resold for $295,000. Okay, $5,000 earnest money deposit. Now that's the way to do it. This investor licensed agent knew to get a larger earnest money deposit from his end buyer. So in case it didn't close and he had to cancel his contract because he's the buyer, he'd still make $5,000 for his effort. Wouldn't make the 16 because it didn't close. There's my transactional funding being paid back, and here's a whoppingly small profit of $8,525.75. Why do I say whoppingly small? Because he didn't have a good buyer's list where he could sell it for more money, and maybe he paid too much to begin with. It doesn't matter. Let's look at the second page of the B2C HUD. There's your commission. So he now received a 3% buyer's agent commission on this property, $8,850. So here's what he got. The A to B leg, he got $16,440 seller's agent commission, $8,525 net profit on the deal, and an $8,850 buyer's agent commission, $33,815.75 net profit, or 12.3% of the total income on the deal, which you might call fees, commissions. I mean, it's a commission. Call it A to B and B to C commissions, 9%, plus a small profit. So again, coming into this transaction, seller comes to you. You close him on the fact that you should be the listing agent. You in fact got 6% of the listing fee. Good. You got $16,440. Not bad. However, you left another $16,000 on the table by not understanding how to do it. Now, if your thought is it legal? These agents and brokers wouldn't be doing this if their license was at risk. You can do this as long as you disclose properly what's going to happen. So let's talk about no money deals. Is it legal to do the no money deals? I've been telling you this is a no money transaction. Yes, small earnest money deposit, or it was borrowed, or whatever else. So here comes an investor to me and he says, Dave, I have this property, $950,000 purchase price. Can you help me? My response, do you have an end buyer? Yes. I can help. Here's the bottom half of the HUD. $45,000 earnest money deposit. You're saying to yourself, hey, Dave, you said no money in the deal. Well, no money in the deal means he borrowed $45,000 because he had no money to put up. So what happened? I had to put up $918,938.69 to close the A to B leg. He's now technically on title. He's the owner of the property. Deed's been signed by the original seller. If recorded electronically, he would be on title. Now, I say recorded electronically because the thought is it's instantaneous. It's not. Those electronic recordings are typically reviewed by staff of the clerk of the court. Sometimes that can take a couple days. It could take a week. It depends. But let's go on. Here's the B to C. Now he's reselling the property. He's the owner of the property. When did he resell it? 20 minutes after we closed on the A to B leg. Sold it for $1.3 million. Woo! $45,000 earnest money deposit from the end buyer. It isn't a coincidence they asked for $45,000. That's because if he couldn't close, he being the end buyer couldn't close, loses 45, he would have lost the 45 on the A to B side. He would have walked away with no money whatsoever. There's my transactional funds being paid back. There's his net profit. That's not $301,000 because he put up $45,000. So you have to deduct his earnest money deposit from all these transactions I did before. The 15 that I did for you, I subtracted the earnest money deposits. There was only like 5 of them there, but I did it. He netted $250,000. Same day, double closing, no money of his own in the transaction. So my question that I always have is, why not you? So what's going to happen to the market in the coming year or years? I'm going to say this is my own personal view and take it for that. I've only been in the business 45 years. I've only seen 4 major cycles in the real estate market where people have lost all, part, or most of their money. I can tell you for sure that nobody knows for sure. My guess is going to be that with all the money that's being generated to try and help people stay in their homes or in their rental properties, that money has to be paid back. It's going to be a gigantic deficit the country carries forward to your children, grandchildren, and probably great-grandchildren. The only way it's going to be paid off is right off the debt by devaluing the currency, or things we don't even want to think about that have never happened in the United States, but that have happened in most other civilized countries in the world. So it can happen. You're going to see pressure on prices, and my contention is they could be lower than they were in the 2006, 7, and 8 bust. I could be wrong, and I hope I am wrong. I will say in closing that as wholesalers, instead of working on long cycles, what's a long cycle? Long to me is a month, 3 months. A year is like infinity. We work on 10-day cycles. 10-day meaning that's the inspection period I got on that property. It's all I care about. If I can't sell it, I have to get rid of it. I have to give it back. I can't take a risk like rehabbers going into the open market and hoping that I can sell it, because that's how you can go out of business very quickly. Almost all of the students who have become rehabbers after they've become wholesalers have gone back to wholesaling as their primary source of income. In Texas, there was one very large rehabber, had rehabbed and closed on over 5,000 homes 2 years ago, I think, a year and a half. He said, I'm done. No more rehabs. Everybody got laid off. What did he do? He went to wholesaling. You can contact me directly. This is my email address, davedinkel@gmail.com. If you have questions, you're welcome to submit them. I will answer your questions, but my students are my priority. I work with them first. Remember, www.hybridismforrealtors.com. There's a video on there about 42 minutes. I suggest you play it through, listen to it, and it will give you some insights on secrets that you may have been missing for some time. I am Dave Dinkel, as I said, and I wish you limitless success in all that you do.